After the 2 rounds of written exams, the exchange competition moved on to its first practical segment, designated alchemy. Beauxbatons had set aside a side hall for the event. Though called a side hall, in a school built into this palace complex, it was still very spacious, large enough to hold 6 wide, fully equipped alchemical workbenches without crowding. Unlike the written tests, the practical round required room for onlookers. Most of those in the audience were upperclassmen from Beauxbatons. Though alchemy classes had been offered here for years, the number of alchemists with the talent and perseverance to study deeply was small. Madame Maxime sat upright in the judges' seats. With her there, the students kept quiet, though curious eyes kept drifting over the 6 contestants. The most attention fell on Lucien and lingered there the longest. That was hardly surprising. He stood noticeably taller than the other 6th and 7th-year contestants. Over the past few days, many at Beauxbatons had spotted him walking with Fleur, and given Fleur's famed pride and fastidiousness, anyone who could get along with her attracted speculation. Dozens of Beauxbatons girls watched Lucien too, drawn by his dark green eyes, which looked especially deep under the hall lights, as if they could draw others in. The 6 alchemical workbenches were set. Once the contestants from the 3 schools took their places, Madame Maxime raised her great hand. Instantly, identical assortments and quantities of materials appeared on every bench, arranged with precise neatness. Today's designated refinement is the microclimate bottle, Madame Maxime announced in her booming voice. 3 sets of basic materials are provided for each competitor. If you exhaust them, additional supplies may be requested. You have 5 hours. Failure to complete within the time will be judged a defeat. She paused to let the information sink in, her gaze sweeping each contestant to ensure they understood the rules, then called out, "The competition begins now." At her words, the atmosphere tightened. Contestants sprang into action, and the hall filled with the clink of glass, the rustle of papers, and the soft thud of ingredients being moved. Lucien's hands were steady and practiced as he arranged his workspace. Thoughts on the microclimate bottle moved through his mind in rapid flashes. This was a high-difficulty alchemy item at Newt level, designed to regulate and control parameters like temperature and humidity within a small area to simulate specific natural climates. It had been chosen because the quality of a finished piece was obvious. One could immediately tell how many distinct climates the bottle could stably and realistically reproduce, and thus judge the refiner's skill. This segment tested not only technical skill, but speed in executing complex alchemical processes under time pressure and the integrity of the final product. 5 hours sounded generous. Unlimited spare materials sounded generous too. But those who knew alchemy understood the caveat. The unlimited was largely psychological. The process was meticulous and time-consuming. A major mistake midway would squander both precious reagents and irretrievable minutes. 2 or 3 serious failures could leave a competitor without the time to craft anything of quality. Lucien fixed his gaze on a milky white crystal on his table, a core component that seemed to have a faint mist trapped inside. He let his fingertips brush its surface and felt the elemental magic patterns along his skin flare to life, little sigils glowing as they connected. He exhaled, sensing the delicate balance he would need to coax into the crystal if the bottle was to hold more than one climate. Then he set to work. 262. What is the teaching method at Hogwarts? Inside the side hall reserved for the alchemy contest, time slipped away under a tense concentration as soon as Madame Maxime announced the start. After the initial hush, the Beauxbatons students in the audience relaxed a little. Whispers spread among them. Watching an alchemy contest was not, in itself, riveting. The repetitive grinding of raw materials, the long pauses for purification, the seemingly monotonous channeling of the alchemical current during refining. But what held their interest were the contestants, the way they carried themselves, the tiny expressions that flickered on a face when a mistake was made or nerves showed, and the subtle differences that arose from each school's style. It was a different kind of diversion from heavy academic pressure. On the judges' panel, several professors watched the contestants' every move. To the right of Madame Maxime sat Beauxbatons' alchemy professor, Laurent Rosier. He looked to be in his 50s, silver-gray hair combed back from a broad, serious forehead. His features were sharp, and his pale blue eyes calmly tracked the 6 competitors below. Laurent's family shared a name and origin with the Rosiers of the British wizarding world, though his branch had settled in France long ago. A notable member of that broader family, Vinda Rosier, had been a devoted follower of Grindelwald, but Laurent's life had taken a different path. He had steered clear of those storms and devoted himself wholly to the mysteries and teaching of alchemy. During the early stages, the contestants' handling of basic materials was largely the same. Laurent watched with casual detachment. But as the core refining stage began, his gaze sharpened. This was the moment when foundation and true skill were revealed. Laurent believed Beauxbaton's alchemy instruction to be among the best in Europe, perhaps the world, but he was a scholar above all, and he regarded the Triwizard Tournament as a rare chance to study the alchemy pedagogy and standards of 2 other ancient schools, Hogwarts and Durmstrang. He swept his eyes across the students. The Durmstrang pupils worked with solid, slightly rugged, pragmatic techniques. The 2 Beauxbaton's contestants moved with clarity and fluid elegance, met exactly in line with their school's reputation. Then his attention snagged on the boy at the left workbench. Eh? Laurent made a nearly inaudible sound of surprise. The student was Lucien Grafton, the Hogwarts entrant and the youngest competitor. Lucien had already impressed in the written exams, perfect scores on both papers. The first test was basic enough, but the second, co-authored by the alchemy professors of all 3 schools, had delved far beyond the standard curriculum, probing talent and the breadth of extracurricular reading. That Lucien had answered everything correctly had surprised Laurent then. What he was seeing now made him even more astonished. Lucien's technique was very classical. In alchemy, there's a rough consensus. Some older methods, though ancient and difficult, are exceptionally powerful. Over time, those techniques had fallen out of common teaching because they were obscure, required rare talent, or were difficult to pass on. Modern instruction emphasized accessibility, safety, and efficiency, so many of the old exquisite methods were hoarded by ancient families or a lucky genius. But Lucien's movements did not look like the modern, standardized textbook approach. They were concise. The alchemical current flowed with an older rhythm at key transitions. His use of the material's intrinsic properties felt bold, even luxurious. Most strikingly, Laurent could find no obvious flaw. The whole process ran as smoothly as water, with control over the alchemical current refined to a staggering degree. A boy of 12 or 13 possessing such depth of practical skill in alchemy? It defied common sense. Had Hogwarts' current alchemy program reached this level, or was Lucien an extraordinary exception? Curious, Laurent shifted his gaze to the other Hogwarts student in the same row, Lehman Selwyn. Selwyn's technique looked like a textbook exemplar of a good student, standardized, steady. Some of his processing details showed the inherited style of the old British pureblood families, which made him stand out among his peers. But the contrast between Selwyn and Lucien was stark. Placed side by side, Selwyn's competent performance looked almost conventional next to Lucien's effortless, uniquely personal demonstration. After a moment of silence, Laurent leaned slightly and addressed the Hogwarts lead professor on his other side in a low, clear voice. Professor Shafiq, if I may be so bold, is your school now tailoring completely different teaching plans to each student's characteristics? Professor Shafiq, if I may be so bold, does your school currently customize completely different teaching plans based on the characteristics and progress of each student? Sitting beside Laurent Rosier, Professor Shafiq, her black curls tightly bound for the public occasion, was momentarily stunned by her French colleague's sudden question and didn't answer right away. Seeing Laurent look at Lucien with keen interest, she quickly understood his meaning, and a flicker of embarrassed color passed through her pale gray eyes. Well, Lucien didn't learn alchemy from me, she said. Surprise crossed Laurent's face. Does Hogwarts have other alchemists? Then comprehension dawned on him. Oh, I see. Could it be that Headmaster Dumbledore took a fancy to the boy's talent and is teaching him personally? If that's the case, it's not surprising. It was a tidy explanation. From the first 2 written exams and the alchemical techniques Lucien had already demonstrated, Laurent was convinced the boy had exceptional talent. And everyone knew that Albus Dumbledore, Hogwarts' headmaster, and often called the greatest wizard of the age, had reached the heights of alchemy himself, once collaborating with the legendary alchemist Nicholas Flamel on groundbreaking work. Put together, it made sense that a student like Lucien might be receiving special instruction. Dumbledore was, after all, Hogwarts' greatest asset and its best advertisement. With a figure like him at the helm, Hogwarts did stand out in some respects. Wizards from other countries would never admit it, of course. The French would still insist Beauxbatons was the finest, and the Americans would loudly proclaim Ilvermorny supreme. Seeing the "I understand" look on Laurent's face, Shafiq found herself at a loss for how to respond. She realized he was making assumptions, but the inconvenient truth was she didn't actually know who had taught Lucien either. Shafiq had a habit of slacking off. No, as she put it herself, she knew how to allocate her energy. Although she was surprised that Lucien had achieved such alchemical skill at his age, she was too lazy to pursue the matter. In the wizarding world, no matter how odd something seemed, it rarely warranted a fuss. Besides, Lucien probably wouldn't be in her alchemy class for a few years. She could deal with it then. Right now, her priority was to see him win the Triwizard Tournament, bring the cup back to Hogwarts, and then persuade Dumbledore to grant her a few extra days of leave. A sudden, practical thought nudged at her. She was away with the team. So who was teaching the alchemy students back at Hogwarts? Dumbledore had only smiled and told her to lead the team well. He hadn't mentioned a substitute. Shafiq blinked, shrugged the question away, and decided she was too idle to worry about it. She eased back into her chair to a position that was presentable without being upright, and turned her attention back to the field. Her pale gray eyes swept over the competitors, some nervous, some composed, before settling on the area in front of Lucien. The flow of magic there and the balance of the elements felt orderly and stable, hardly what one would expect from a teenager in competition. And his movements, this boy's, were still remarkably quick. At the judges' table, Madame Maxime listened with a faint smile as her alchemy professor and the senior judge from Hogwarts exchanged quiet whispers. She knew, of course, from whom Lucien's gift was inherited, but it was not something to announce aloud. Anyone who had dealings with Nicholas Flamel in recent years could sense that the 6th-century-old legend was withdrawing from public life, reluctant to meddle in worldly affairs and pouring himself into some private research instead. That Nicholas had not loudly proclaimed Lucien as his final student seemed, to Maxime, a deliberate measure of protection. Lucien was still young. Perhaps they were simply waiting for the right moment. She even entertained the odd thought that Lucien's appearance might have been, in some sense, an accident even for Nicholas. This young man had brought a new, unexpected vigor into the alchemist's life. From the undertone of his recent letters, Maxime felt Nicholas himself seemed a few years younger. A few days earlier, she had received an astonishingly odd letter, a heavy, exquisitely made envelope that looked like a formal funeral invitation. Inside was a photograph of Nicholas posed with his own corpse and a note explaining that he was considering holding a world-renowned funeral for himself to throw off certain covetous eyes. Maxime never would have imagined the sober, legendary Nicholas engaging in such a near-playful deception. Her thoughts were interrupted by movement on the floor. Lucien, carrying a plain crystal phial, had left his workstation and was walking steadily toward the judge's table. Maxime's brows rose. Finished so soon? Almost crossed her mind, but she quickly replaced it with a more sensible observation. Of course, he is Nicholas's student. That would account for it. With Lucien's approach, attention in the hall snapped to him. The judges stopped whispering, murmurs rippled through the audience, and the other contestants, still bent over their own work, could not help but look up, their expressions a mixture of surprise, incomprehension, recognition, scrutiny, and doubt. From her high seat, Madame Maxime took them all in with composed grace. Her gaze lingered on her favorite student, Fleur. The azure calm that usually sat so proudly in Fleur's eyes flickered, as if a pebble had disturbed a placid pool. A small, pleased smile found its way to Maxime's lips. She had noticed the natural rapport that had formed between Fleur and Lucien over the past days, and she approved. Young people ought to converse. If she could cultivate a friendly impression of Beauxbatons in someone like Lucien, or perhaps even persuade him to transfer, it would be most advantageous. Lucien's value to Maxime extended far beyond his identity as Nicholas Flamel's pupil. His potential and abilities were extraordinary in their own right. One must remember that the reason Hogwarts enjoyed such prominence across the wizarding world was because Albus Dumbledore taught there. A school's greatest wizard is its most brilliant calling card and its surest foundation. Maxime had the clear intuition that, if this young man matured as he might, he could stand at the pinnacle of the magical world in years to come, perhaps even become the Dumbledore of the next generation. The crucial thing was that Lucien was still so young. He had not yet spent 6 or 7 years under Hogwarts' roof. If Beauxbatons could attract and carefully nurture him now, he might develop a deep sense of belonging here, and if he transferred willingly, there would be little Dumbledore could do to object. In her recent correspondence with Nicholas, Maxime had even detected a trace of unease about Lucien remaining at Hogwarts. That unease had caught her attention. For some reason, mishaps had been disturbingly frequent at Hogwarts in recent years. The Chamber of Secrets, the yearly troubles with the Defense Against the Dark Arts post. It hardly seemed a place where one could study in peace. Many thoughts flickered through Madame Maxime's mind, but her expression remained serene and regal. She watched as Lucien reached the table and set the modest crystal bottle on an empty space before the judges with calm, practiced movements. "Everyone," she said, turning to the alchemy professor at her side, in a voice that was gentle, yet carried clearly across the hall, "it seems we have a contestant who has finished early. Proceed with the judging, according to procedure." 265. Microclimate bottle. Under the concentrated gaze of everyone in the side hall, Lucien gently set the seemingly ordinary crystal bottle on the long table before the judge's bench. The glass was clear from top to bottom, with only the faintest misted textures gathering around the base. He drew his wand and tapped the mouth of the microclimate bottle. A condensed, soft beam of light fell across its rim. Rows of complex, orderly runes along the bottle's surface glowed from within, flickering like slow breath. The space inside the bottle began to change. A very pale white mist rose from the bottom, spiraling upward to suggest dampness. From the center of that vapor, a warm, golden halo rippled outward, the temperature quietly rising until it glowed like sunlight. As the runes continued to cycle, the scene inside the bottle evolved into something still more exquisite. Several judges on the bench leaned forward, studying the submission that had been placed before them. The heart of refining a microclimate bottle lies in the refiner's delicate control and combination of elements. Each simulated climate is the result of a careful elemental balance. The judging was simple in principle. The more distinct climates a finished piece could stably reproduce, the higher its quality and the greater the refiner's skill. Madame Maxime nodded once, admiration plain in her eyes. Professor Shafiq wore a relaxed expression, unconcerned by the display. Her thoughts had likely already wandered to how to arrange that coveted extra holiday after the competition. Professor Laurent leaned in, watching every subtle elemental flow and rune resonance inside the glass, clicking his tongue in wonder. The more he examined it, the more he felt the alchemy on show had surpassed the usual work of a student. The judges exchanged a few low words, but did not announce Lucien's score on the spot. All scores would be revealed only after the 5-hour competition period ended. That rule existed to avoid influencing the contestants still at work and to keep the contest fair. Even so, Lucien's early completion, nearly 2 hours ahead of schedule, inevitably affected the others. Riemann and Fleur, who knew Lucien well, were unfazed. They had seen his level of alchemy before. Riemann glanced up for a moment, then bent back to the bottle forming on his bench. He had no pressure to win and only needed to perform at his usual standard. Fleur's lips curved almost imperceptibly after her brief look. Then she composed herself and continued shaping the silver-red magical currents woven into her own bottle. For the other contestants, however, the impact was far more visible. One of the Durmstrang boys grew restless when he saw the judges begin their review. Rushing to adjust his progress, his control wavered as he poured magic into a half-formed component. A sharp, clear crack echoed through the suddenly quiet hall. Fine fissures spidered across the surface of the piece, the trapped cold air dissipating and leaving a dusting of white frost on the workbench. The stern-faced judge heading the Durmstrang delegation frowned, his expression darkening. The student drew a deep breath, fought down his panic, and swept his wand decisively to clear away the ruined component. He snatched up a second set of materials and began refining again with determined speed. The judge's features eased. The damaged part had not been a central or time-consuming element, and there was still time to recover if the student hurried. The Durmstrang judge couldn't help casting another look at Lucien's quietly shifting bottle, then at the neat pile of materials on his student's table, and he sighed inwardly at the gap between them. Only a little over 3 hours into the competition, Lucien had already taken an empty seat in the Beauxbatons student section at Madame Maxime's gesture. Suddenly, a dozen heads turned. The Beauxbatons students watched him with curious, eager, and admiring eyes, all of them studying the young Hogwarts prodigy who had gone from contestant to spectator so quickly. 266, second is first. Lucien took a seat in the audience, watching the few contestants still struggling on stage while his thoughts wandered to his next plans. Once today's session ended, only the six portion would remain. He still needed to polish the final details of the two. After the competition finished, he should go to the library. During his few days at Beauxbatons, he had seen most of the sights worth seeing, but the place he frequented most was that library and its wealth of books. As one of the three major 18 schools in Europe, Beauxbatons' collection, both in size and scope, did not disappoint. It was a pity he only had half a month and couldn't read everything. In the future, a passing thought crossed his mind. Should he apply for professorships at 18 schools around the world after graduation? He could teach for a while, read the library, then move on to the next school. Travel thousands of miles and read thousands of books. Why not? Or was there some kind of 18 that could make clones, place one in each region, and multiply his learning efficiency? Time slipped by while Lucien's mind wandered. Madame Maxime glanced at the 18 clock. When the hour hand reached the scheduled mark, her clear, sonorous voice rang through the hall. The competition time is over. All contestants, please stop your operations and leave the 10 tests. The contestants on stage halted one by one. Except for the Durmstrang student who'd made a mistake midway and had to redo parts, now looking flustered, the others still had ample time and were doing final checks and stabilizations. The professor's review and scoring proceeded quickly. The judging criteria for the four were already clear and straightforward: the variety and stability of the simulated climates. Not surprisingly, Lucien's entry, indisputably excellent, earned the full 30 points. By this point, 3 stages of the zero were complete: 2 written exams, 20 points each, and the designated alchemy practical, 30 points. Lucien had taken perfect scores in all 3, and his total already put him far ahead. Maxim then announced the rules for the final, longest stage. Next will be the free crafting stage. Each contestant will be assigned an independent 15 classroom that no one else may enter. The classrooms will be enchanted with the corresponding 18 to ensure that the crafting process is undisturbed. For this stage, each contestant would have a full week to produce a 15 item of their choosing. Beauxbatons would no longer supply any materials. Contestants must obtain everything themselves. Alchemy and potions can create immense value, but the study requires resources. Plainly put, you have to spend to earn. The ability to acquire appropriate and rare raw materials is itself a measure of a superior alchemist's or pioneer's overall competence. This week would therefore test not only skill, but resource planning. A week from now, all works will undergo a unified review. At that time, besides us, Maxime gestured to the several fortines from her own and the other schools standing beside her, we will also invite a number of prestigious 5 recognized by the magical world to serve as judges, ensuring an objective and fair assessment across different types and approaches. The designated 4-4 project had a uniform standard, so the 3 schools' fortines could judge it easily. But the 6 is freer and lacks a single measure. Inviting a wider, authoritative third-party panel was the best way to guarantee fairness and weight. When the rules were announced, the contestants reacted in various ways, but most no longer seemed driven by the idea of winning the championship. With a monster like Lucien in the lead, who had swept 3 perfect scores, the race for first place had long since lost its suspense. Better to treat second as first. That was still worth fighting for. 267. Searching for Nagini. The next morning, Lucien stepped into the private alchemy classroom Beauxbatons had assigned him. The instant he crossed the threshold, several subtle but precise magical pulses swept over him like invisible scanners, gentle, thorough sweeps designed to prevent contestants from smuggling unregistered items and to keep the competition fair. The room was spacious and bright, stocked with every bit of alchemical apparatus one could need. Brass scales, multi-necked cauldrons, precision crystal cutters. On the shelves against the wall, the materials Lucien had registered the day before were sorted and neatly stacked. The rules for the free crafting phase were strict. All materials had to be registered in advance and were kept here by the school. Every time a contestant entered or left, they underwent the same magical inspection. Aside from wands, personal items, especially containers enlarged with undetectable extension charms, were forbidden. If anything needed to be replenished midway, a new declaration had to be made and the inspection repeated. Lucien scanned the room, confirmed everything, moved to the center of the workbench, and drew his wand. The crafting began. Thousands of miles away, deep inside an isolated primeval Albanian forest, cold mist swirled among bare branches. Newt walked with uneven steps through the silent wood. Each breath he exhaled turned to white in the air. Over half a month had passed since Lucien had told him there might be a great unusual serpent here, and that it was highly likely the transformed form of his old friend Nagini, who suffered from a Ash-11. Newt had wasted no time. He had set out immediately to begin the faint, difficult search. Albania was small and sparsely populated by wizards. It lacked a formal ministry presence. Precisely because of that, the land was rarely disturbed and nurtured many rare magical creatures, a richness that also attracted dark wizards and illegal poachers. Newt had visited before to protect those creatures and was not unfamiliar with the terrain. Before officially entering the forest, he followed his accustomed precautions and sought out a local underworld contact, a portkey dealer he knew well. These gray market operators had become his illicit routes around formal bans, carrying him to places he was otherwise forbidden to go. At his peak, more than 100 countries had formally barred Newt from entry. That was less a moral judgment than an exasperated response to his knack for attracting trouble and the menagerie that always seemed to spill out of his suitcase. The portkey dealers, with their shadowy networks and hidden knowledge, often had information unavailable on the open market. Their intelligence offered hope. Roughly a month earlier, a woodcutter had reported seeing a strangely large and terrifying snake at the forest's edge. One had to remember how vast this forest was, an ocean of trees and undergrowth. Finding a single snake within it was like searching for a needle in a haystack. It was midwinter too, and ordinary snakes should have been hibernating. Newt could only hope that Nagini, altered by the 11, behaved differently from normal snakes and might still be active in the cold. When he reached a relatively open clearing, Newt stopped, set his case down with practiced motion, and unlatched it. The lid sprang open, and a dozen quick shapes shot out with a rustle. Krups, dog-like creatures with forked tails that resembled Jack Russell Terriers, nifflers with bright, darting eyes, and light gray Tebow warthogs. They were all masters at tracking. Newt pulled from his pocket a handful of small magical talismans, alchemical wards Lucien had given him to guard against dangerous ambushes. He secured one on each of the little creatures about to set off. "I'm counting on you," he said softly. "Help me find my old friend." Surrounded by a dozen or so magical creatures, Newt pulled several letters with worn edges and yellowed paper from his inner pocket. They were the last correspondence between him and Nagini. Time had dimmed the ink and left the pages with only a faint, nearly imperceptible scent. The little ones leaned forward, using their various talents to memorize the trace. A moment later, they scattered into the surrounding wood and began the search. Once the creatures had dispersed, Newt chose a direction by instinct and set off on his own. His magical foundations were solid, and his senses sharpened by years of study and travel made him far more capable than ordinary folk at reading tracks and signs. In his understanding and handling of magical creatures, he was unrivaled. His companions had pulled off feats no one would expect. The Bowtruckles had helped him escape prison and pick locks. Whoopers and Zoas had ferried him through the air, and a Niffler had once helped him steal a certain someone's token of affection, changing the course of events. He had patience. Retired now, he had the luxury of time. 3 or 4 days passed. The creatures searched several nearby areas, but brought back no definite news. Newt felt no real anxiety. He walked through the cold, rough forest with none of the sluggishness of an old man. He might as well have been walking on air. Some weeks before, Liu Guang had sent a curious gift, a potion brewed by Lucien called Vitality Rejuvenation. After taking it, Newt and his wife Tina both felt noticeably lighter and more agile. Between them, they had lived dangerous lives. One had been an Auror for Makusa, hunting dark wizards. The other had gone everywhere to study and handle threatening magical creatures, and both had endured the wizarding war against Grindelwald. Chronic aches and weaknesses had lingered despite ordinary healing and conventional potions, so they were astonished to find a single bottle of Lucien's brew alleviate what years of remedies had not. Newt felt years younger. His strength and stamina returned, allowing him to pull a string of all-nighters caring for his charges. Vitality Rejuvenation lived up to its name. His thoughts wandered to a letter from Lucien a few days ago, mentioning an alchemy competition at Beauxbatons. Newt was no stranger to Beauxbatons. In his younger days, he had visited often to study the local creatures. He was thinking of that when a tug at his pant leg snapped him back to the present. A pure black Niffler was looking up at him with bead-bright eyes. Newt understood at once. It had found something and wanted to lead. "Good work," he murmured, and produced a prepped sapphire from his pocket, not valuable but shiny, handing it over. The Niffler seized it with delight, tucking it carefully into the pouch on its belly and patting it with tiny paws as if to make sure it wouldn't fall out. Then it pressed its nose to the ground and began to lead. They pushed through a tangle of shrubs and came into a clearing where snow lay mixed with thick, withered leaves. The Niffler stopped and jabbed a paw at a patch of ground. Newt crouched and without hesitation raised his wand, a pura vestigium. A soft bang and a spray of fine golden powder burst from the wand tip, drifting outward to coat the ground for several yards. Where the powder settled, impressions rose into view, shallow and deep, feathered and clawed, patterns of birds' talons and the rounded, blossom-shaped prints of small mammals layered over one another. Newt studied them closely, searching the tangled impressions for the singular, winding indentation of a crawling snake. The Niffler, having just been rewarded, worked itself into a frenzy, nose nearly glued to the earth. It sniffed and scratched until it stopped by a tree root, gave a short, excited cry, and waved its little paws for Newt. He stepped to the spot, raised his wand again. Revelio. A brighter light flashed from the wand. The golden powder seemed to respond, drawing inward, condensing and rising like the reversed frames of a film. It coalesced into a faint, shimmering illusion suspended in the air. A huge snake slithered through that transparent scene, dark green scales catching the light as it moved. Its motion had the cold, patient composure of an animal that senses the world in long, slow calculations. Vertical pupils cut its triangular head. There was no human intelligence or temper behind them, only raw, elemental wildness and a wary awareness of its surroundings. Newt's heart tightened at the sight. He knew it at once. Nagini. Newt moved quickly through the winter forests of Albania. His steps were light, the only sound the faint crunch of thin ice breaking underfoot. The pitch-black Niffler perched on his shoulder, claws hooked into his coat, nose twitching as it scanned the snow-drab undergrowth. Tracking wasn't easy. Nagini's scent came and went, faint and intermittent in this season, when snow muffled everything and the cold washed away delicate traces. When the trail blurred, Newt paused and either relied on his own instincts or called on other magical creatures to help. With every stop and restart, excitement tightened in his chest. It had been many years since Nagini had said goodbye. Since then, the same questions. Is she still alive? What has she become? Is she in pain? Had pricked at him and at his old companions, the friends who had faced life and death together. Several times the trail seemed to die out, but Newt had the patience for forests and animals and for that lost old friend. At last, following an extremely faint winding indentation, prompted by the niffler's sudden, urgent sniffing, Newt came to a sheltered rock face. A clutch of ancient, gnarled trees leaned into one another, forming a dark hollow at their base. Icicles hung from its mouth. Inside it was pitch black and smelled of earth, decay, and a cold, fishy tang. The niffler gave a low, warning squeak, its tiny claws digging into Newt's curly hair. Newt was about to soothe the creature when a slow, heavy rustle came from the depths of the hollow, the sound of scales scraping branches and frozen soil. A dark green triangular head slipped out of the shadows, followed by a winding body that glimmered with a cold sheen. This was no ordinary python. Huge and sinuous, it moved with a terrible lightness and strength. The front of its body lifted like a cobra's, indifferent yellow, vertical pupils fixed on Newt, a forked tongue flicking periodically. An oppressive sense of wildness and the aura of the dark arts radiated from it. A flash of pain crossed Newt's face. He had steelied himself for this, but seeing the woman he had once known, whose eyes had held melancholy and kindness, reduced to such a beast, was still hard to accept. Now he understood more clearly why Nagini had left without a goodbye. If she felt the blood curse would consume her, and she would no longer be herself, she could not bear the thought of her friends seeing what she would become. Slowly, deliberately, Newt slid his wand back into his pocket and turned his body sideways to seem less threatening. He extended a hand, palm open, moving toward the snake in tiny, careful increments. His voice was low and gentle, the kind he might use to call an old friend. "Nagini, it's me, Newt. Don't be afraid. I mean no harm." As he murmured and inched forward, the tension around the snake's pupils eased just a fraction, the taut lines of muscle loosened. A little of Newt's hope returned. Did she still remember? His lips twitched with an anticipatory smile. Then Nagini's head jerked as though she'd heard a summons only she could perceive. The faint human-like look in her eyes vanished. In its place burned a pure, violent ferocity, the gaze of an enraged predator. Muscles coiled. The snake contracted and lashed forward with terrifying speed, mouth opening to reveal snow-white fangs, aiming straight for Newt's neck. It moved so fast it left a dark green blur in the air. Newt's instincts were quicker than thought. He rolled to the side and back, dodging, but Nagini's strike was faster than he imagined. Just as the fangs closed in, the dial of the plain watch on Newt's left wrist flared to life. Two solid beams of magical light erupted at once. One formed a translucent circular shield, protego, around him. The other warped the air in front of him, an impedimenta field designed to slow an attack. The layers of protection snapped into place, enveloping him. At the same instant, a gray flare lit the brass buckle of his belt. A precise Petrificus totalis leapt out and struck Nagini square on the forehead. Her forward momentum snapped off, muscles locked, and her attack froze in mid-strike. She collapsed onto the snow and dead leaves with a heavy thud, rigid as if carved from stone. That wasn't all. The necklace at Newt's throat, stamped with the Scamander family crest, blazed with a warm gold and shivered into over a dozen slender beams that shot into the frozen ground around the immobilized snake like stakes. They linked, forming a temporary magical cage that enclosed Nagini's petrified body. Newt finished his roll and rose, panting and shaken. He touched the watch and the belt as they returned to their inert states, a flicker of fear and then embarrassment crossing his face. Fear because Nagini's sudden frenzy had been unexpectedly lethal. Embarrassment because he'd forgotten he was wearing the assortment of trinkets the boy Lucien had insisted he take. Protective and trapping artifices that had improbably just saved him. He steadied himself, retrieved his wand, and with a practiced motion levitated the heavy, rigid body. The suitcase he'd left at his feet yawned open and accepted Nagini's girth with an unnatural ease. He snapped the lid shut, shouldered the case, and scanned the hushed forest. Not wanting to bring more danger down on anyone or delay, he twisted and compressed himself in a single, soft pop of displacement and vanished without a trace. 270. The careless snake that lost its love after Newt apparitioned. Away, the Albanian forest fell back into a deep, undisturbed silence. About 100 meters from the tree hollow, buried in the layers of the canopy, a lead gray viper lay coiled around a thick horizontal branch. Its triangular head slipped out from under the leaves, forked tongue flicking, its narrow pupils fixed on the spot where Newt had just been. It was strange, winter, when snakes should have long been dormant. Then, faint wisps of black mist began to seep out from between the viper's scales. The snake's body went rigid. The life drained from its eyes, which had once shone with the cold light of a cold-blooded creature. They dulled to the flat sheen of dusty beads. With a dull thump, the viper fell from the branch to the hard, frozen ground, bouncing once and then lying still. Where the viper had perched, a pitch-black shape coalesced on the branch, its edges twisting and unstable. It had no consistent form, more a mass of dense shadow than anything solid, except for two faintly pulsing clusters of crimson mist where eyes should be. This was Lord Voldemort. Since the destruction of Professor Quirrell's body at Hogwarts the year before, this remnant of a soul had fled in panic and drifted back to this remote Albanian wood. Those two blood-red eyes stared intently toward the clearing where Newt had disappeared, and the shapeless thing trembled with rage, chilling the air around it. Damn him, Newt Scamander. Voldemort had a working knowledge of notable figures in the magical world, especially those who had not openly sided with him in past wars or who possessed unusual talents. The figure he had just sensed, carrying the familiar suitcase accompanied by beasts, had been easy enough to identify. How had Newt found Nagini? How had he taken her? The black mist seethed. Even stripped of a body and reduced to a fugitive soul, Voldemort had not lost his Parseltongue. He believed it to be a bloodline inheritance from Salazar Slytherin, a mark of lineage and authority. While wandering this forest, he had used that gift to establish a connection with the great dark green serpent, Nagini. She was no ordinary animal. In their communications, he had sensed an intelligence and awareness far beyond that of normal snakes. She could understand his complex thoughts and respond. In those years of weakness and solitude, when he survived only by possessing low-level animals, Nagini had become almost the only thing he could call a conversational companion, a twisted comfort, something like a friend. A subtle, stable, magical link had formed between them. Voldemort had a plan. Once he regained power, he would kill someone, split off a piece of his soul, and merge it into Nagini, making her a Horcrux so they could be together forever. But that plan had been upended. Why had Newt Scamander been here? Fury and confusion scorched the already fragile remnant of his soul. Earlier, when Voldemort had sensed Newt approach and confront Nagini, he tried to send the command to attack through their bond. Nagini at first seemed to respond, then the assault failed. How had Scamander dodged it? Being distant and bound to the fragile body of a lowly viper limited what he could perceive. He hadn't clearly seen the magical light at Newt's wrists and waist. All he had seen was Nagini lunge, and then, inexplicably, become subdued and taken away. Years of experimenting with dark magic's corruption of the soul and the repeated pain and ruin of failure had rendered Voldemort's remnant unstable. The black mist surged outward, freezing the air further around it. At Hogwarts last year, besides the expected interference from Harry Potter, a boy named Lucien had appeared and, after a confrontation, had weakened Voldemort's soul even more. Now, he could only possess small creatures in the forest, and even snakes, those most compatible with him, could not sustain his soul for long. Their fragile bodies collapsed within days. He had to find a way to gather life force and strengthen his soul quickly. His goal remained to seize a living human body or otherwise reform his physical form. Nagini had been part of that plan, a ready-made, powerful ally. Instead, Newt had intervened. Murderous intent rippled through the black mist like venom. The vow formed in the thing's thought. Once the Dark Lord had a body again, he would find Newt Scamander, make him suffer an excruciating death, and reclaim Nagini. And that boy Lucien, the soul mist flickered with hatred. Everyone who blocked him, everyone who humiliated him with failure, deserved to die. They all deserved to die. 271. Voldemort's Horcruxes. More than half of the free alchemy session days had passed. Lucien had finished his scheduled progress for the day and returned to his temporary dormitory at Beauxbatons for a short rest. He had just settled onto the sofa by the window when an invisible ripple shimmered in the air. Liu Guang's figure emerged silently, a delicate little cloth bag hanging from its chest. Auspicious clouds rolled softly around him, carrying a small roll of parchment that floated in front of Lucien. "Master, a letter from Mr. Scamander." Liu Guang's ethereal voice sounded directly in his mind. Then, with a note of anticipation, it added, "Would you like to reply now? If not, may I go for a stroll in the mountains? I'll be nearby. Summon me whenever you need." Lucien reached out and took the letter, waving his hand. "Go ahead. Stay safe." The little Qilin had been eager to explore the hills around Beauxbatons ever since arriving in the new environment, just as it had been when it first entered the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts. Liu Guang nodded happily and vanished in a flash, teleporting away. Lucien broke the envelope sealed with familiar handwriting and skimmed the contents. Joy brightened his face. Scamander had found Nagini in the Albanian woods. Then his expression tightened as he read on. The letter said Nagini had suddenly lunged and attacked during their communication. Fortunately, the alchemical amulets Scamander had been given earlier had been triggered in time. Newt had subdued her and taken her away without serious harm. Lucien rubbed the high-quality parchment between his fingers. According to the timeline, Lord Voldemort shouldn't yet have had the chance to make Nagini into a Horcrux. Still, the variables Lucien had introduced, especially the way he had battered the Dark Lord's remnant soul last year, might have sped things up or delayed them. Wounding Voldemort so severely could mean a longer recovery and a delay in creating a Horcrux. He shook his head and pushed the speculation aside for the moment. First, he needed to confirm Nagini's current physical state. Once the competition at Beauxbatons ended, he could visit Scamander, or simply wait until the summer. Important, but not urgent. His thoughts drifted to Voldemort's other Horcruxes. In the original story, Voldemort had made 7 Horcruxes: Tom Riddle's diary, the Gaunt family ring, Slytherin's locket, Ravenclaw's diadem, Hufflepuff's cup, the 9, and Harry himself. Lucien stood and walked to the desk, pulled out a blank sheet of parchment, picked up a quill, and began to jot down and arrange what he knew. Diary, already in Dumbledore's possession. Gaunt ring, should be in the abandoned Gaunt shack. Need to warn Dumbledore about the curse on the ring. Slytherin's locket, in possession of Creature, the house elf of the House of Black? ? Ravenclaw's diadem, still in the room of requirement at Hogwarts. Circled, Hufflepuff's cup, in the Lestrange family vault at Gringotts. Nagini, found by Newt, possibly not yet a Horcrux. Harry, the page quickly filled with circles and question marks. Lucien couldn't precisely remember every timeline detail. Some Horcruxes still needed to be located and confirmed in person. For example, finding the locket required locating that old house elf from the House of Black. The Stat 1 was not easily accessible either. The portrait of the former headmaster, Phineas Nigellus Black, would surely know how to get back to the old home, but asking that portrait directly would likely result in a snide rebuff. Still, that wasn't a major problem. Lucien tapped the parchment with the quill's end and thought ahead. In a few months, the sole remaining legal heir of the House of Black, the wrongly condemned Sirius Black, would escape from prison. It would be convenient to talk to him then. He wasn't worried about finding Sirius. According to the plot, after his escape, Sirius's main goal would be to find Harry. When the time came, Lucien could stake out near Harry. Use Harry as bait? The idea, oddly angler-like, made him flinch inwardly. A smile almost formed, but he suppressed it and frowned instead, staring at the name on the page. How to deal with the fragment of Voldemort's soul inside the boy? Was the only option to follow the original course? Let Harry confront Voldemort and be killed once by the Dark Lord's own hand? No. There were still risks. Lucien had already changed many things. A single mistake at a critical step could have irreversible consequences. There must be a better way. Inside the private 12 classroom, Beauxbatons had prepared for the contestants. The air shimmered with the characteristic glow that followed the flow of 14. The precision instruments around the room had stopped their operations. In the center of the workbench sat a lightweight book, whose cover glimmered with dark silver and mystic blue light, flickering gently. Lucien stood before the table, his wand tracing the final arcs with a steady hand. Pure 14 condensed into visible silver filaments of light flowing from the tip of his wand and seeping precisely into the dizzyingly complex magical etchings along the notebook's edges. The patterns lit up one by one, like veins being injected with life, finally converging at the center of the cover into a stable, harmonious composite rune array. The light flashed and then vanished, leaving behind a deep color with an extraordinary texture. "It's almost over," he whispered, lowering his wand. He meant the final free 12 segment was nearly finished. Once the contestants submitted their respective 12 works and the rankings were determined, this trip to Beauxbatons would end successfully. He also meant the repayment of the loan for the 2, which was approaching its final stretch. In retrospect, the actual difficulty of this 10 hadn't been very high for the current Lucien. The task required selling a specified quantity and value of potions and Dre 7 items. The talent boosts from the Potions S Plus and Alchemy SS Plus had both reached exceptional levels. Even more important was Nicholas Flamel's unreserved instruction, which had accelerated Lucien's progress to the point that he sometimes felt dazed. So over the past 6 months, he had concentrated his main efforts on researching, developing, and mass-producing 12 items, with potions as a supplement. One novel, practical item after another had been born from his hands and funneled into the market through appropriate channels. With no shortage of funds, technology, or connections, the loan progress bar for the Emerald Tablet had steadily climbed to about 2/3. Lucien's gaze fell on the maul, about to be borne on the table. His fingertips brushed the cover. With the right pricing strategy, once this 4th item, capable of revolutionizing the wizarding world's ways of communication, was officially launched, it would likely sweep the market. The remaining loan progress would be easily filled. After the competition ended and he returned, he could use occasions like Valentine's Day to launch a series of beauty potions and exquisite 12 accessories aimed at the female market. Combined with other miscellaneous income, it wouldn't even take a full year to pay off the 10 for the 2. A small smile curled the corner of his mouth. In an ideal environment, R&D efficiency maximized, startup capital adequate, no institutional or managerial hurdles, success seemed to follow naturally as long as market demand was correctly identified. His thoughts returned to the work before him. The magical patterns were now perfect, and the prior functional tests had passed. It was time to give it an official name. Without much hesitation, the word Instant Whisper flashed through his mind. To cross the distance of space and deliver words and thoughts instantly. The name emphasized the instantaneous communication function while retaining the delivery feeling of traditional letters. It was succinct and fitting. "Let's call it Instant Whisper," he murmured, lowering his head slightly to stare at the piece that condensed his lifeblood and future vision. Habitually sorting through his next plans, he muttered under his breath, "Once the 10 for the 2 is finished, I won't have any long-term burdens for the time being. As for those monthly and 11s, they're all minor issue." A clear, somewhat cheerful system notification rang directly in Lucien's mind. Host has triggered a loan. Youth Apple Seeds, annual loan. 273. Youth Apple, inside the alchemy classroom, Lucien pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration. He had just realized his previous annual loan was about to be repaid. Did the system really have to throw something at him the moment he was idle? Its timing was infuriatingly perfect. He pushed the irritation aside and turned his attention to the translucent light screen hovering before him to read the new loan details. He had some vague recollection of the Apple of Youth from myth, but he wasn't sure it was the same one from Norse legend. Loan item, Apple of Youth, 365 days. Loan description. The Apple of Youth was once tended by Idun, the goddess of youth. This is a seed from such an apple. With irrigation and cultivation by specific methods, it can grow into a mature tree. Its fruit restores youth, extends lifespan, and increases the consumer's arcane power. Repayment task. Successfully treat 3 different bloodline curses. The Apple of Youth. Lucien whispered, piecing together the fragments of stories he'd heard. The Apple of Youth, often called the Golden Apple in Norse myths, was a miraculous plant guarded by Idun. The gods were said to need the fruit to maintain their youth and immortality. He vaguely remembered Idun's relationship with Loki, how Loki once deceived her, resulting in her being taken by a giant and nearly killed, and later tricked her rescue. Idun was reputedly kind and forgiving. Even after betrayal, she forgave Loki and still believed there was good in him. Restoring youth and extending life was irresistible to anyone facing old age or death. At Lucien's current age, youth and immortality weren't urgent concerns, but an apple that could extend life would mean he wouldn't need to rely on Qilin blood anymore. The promise of increased arcane power caught his eye as well. He narrowed his eyes and asked the system the crucial question in his mind. System, can the arcane power increase from the apple of youth break through a wizard's innate arcane cap? A curt reply blinked on the screen. Ha, what do you think? This is a legendary divine artifact. Answer properly, Lucien said. Hey, yes, it can. The arcane power gained from the apple of youth is a permanent, additive enhancement and is not limited by the consumer's innate arcane talent. Lucien nodded slightly. That was immensely valuable. How does the seed need to be tended to grow and bear fruit? It requires a continuous supply of a large amount of pure arcane energy, various rare magical materials as nutrients, and the blood of a mythical creature rich in life essence. Mythical creature blood, Lucien's concern sharpened. Before he could ask more, the system added, Liu Guang is a mythical creature that meets the requirements. Lucien frowned. He knew the little Qilin, Liu Guang, was a true mythical being, but if cultivating the apple demanded Qilin blood, that would defeat the point of avoiding further Qilin sacrifices. The system clarified. Only a single initial drop is needed to activate the seed's properties. Subsequent growth and irrigation rely mainly on arcane energy and materials. No further mythical blood is required. Relief eased his expression. Only one drop to awaken it, then he could grow and nourish it with arcane power and rare reagents. His gaze landed on the repayment task again. Treat 3 bloodline curses. Bloodline curses were typically rooted in corrupt dark arts, but Lucien's own aptitude for dark arts was exceptionally high. It gave him a natural advantage in recognizing and dismantling such curses. Combined with other magical resources, the task would be difficult but far from impossible. He considered the costs and benefits and made up his mind quickly. Apply for the loan, Apple of Youth Seed. Ding, the host has successfully applied for the Apple of Youth Seed. The seed has been issued to the host. System evaluation. For the sake of immortality and youth, old fools will do anything. The free alchemy segment had reached its final evaluation. Fleur, feeling a little nervous, arrived at the door of the hall being used for the finals and paused. She saw a familiar figure leaning against a pillar. Lucien looked like he was resting with his eyes closed, but his condition made Fleur start. His complexion was terrible. His normally fair skin was now an unhealthy pallor. His lips had lost their color, and he radiated a clear exhaustion, as if he were just recovering from a serious illness. Lucien? Fleur hurried forward, her blue eyes full of concern. You look awful. Shouldn't you go to the 8 first? At the sound of her voice, Lucien opened his eyes. The dark green irises were dull. He waved a hand and forced a smile. I'm fine, Fleur. I just overdid the research last night. I'll be okay after some rest. He exhaled, feeling more helpless than relieved. The burned-out look was entirely because he had been screwed over by that 5. The previous night, he'd used a drop of Nime to awaken the 5 seed, and when he began injecting 16 into it to complete the first 2, he finally understood what the system meant by requires a large amount of pure 16. The tiny seed was practically a bottomless pit. It devoured his 16 at a speed and volume that far exceeded his expectations. Worse, the feeding had to be continuous. During the same growth stage, the seed would only recognize and accept the 16 from a single wizard. If someone else took over midway, all previously accumulated irrigation progress would reset to 0, and they'd have to start over. On top of that, the 16 it required had to carry the distinct personal characteristics of the wizard. The attributeless pure, 16, produced by something like the Philosopher's Stone, couldn't satisfy it. The first attempt nearly drained all the 16 in his body. Lucien had never felt so completely emptied of steam before. It was more unpleasant than pulling month-long all-nighters and then fighting a vigorous boxing match. He could still feel the hollow, weak sensation from being nearly depleted. He had SS-grade magical talent, his 669 growth rate and ceiling already outclassed his peers and many adults, but this was only the initial planting stage. He couldn't help but sympathize with Idun, the mythological goddess of youth who tended the fieve. The gardener's work must be brutally demanding, far from romantic. According to the system, as the Tha-5 moved through different growth stages, the amount of 16.9 required for each subsequent irrigation stepped up. The only mercy was that the draining wasn't a daily demand. It only needed to be done about once every half-month. If it were daily, Lucien wouldn't be able to do anything else. Normally, the seed could be watered and cultivated with various magical materials or specific fusions refined from them, but the material list was a nightmare. It covered almost every known material in the magical world. Many were already rare. Some were on the verge of extinction because of overharvesting or ecological change. The worst part was that the list explicitly included several materials that had been officially declared extinct. If this 16 world truly had gods and a mythical era, then some of the nutrients the 5 required were relics of that lost environment. After thousands of years and the world's changes, it's no surprise some of those materials had vanished. As for the lone quest to cure 3 different forests, Lucien already had a clear first target in mind, the Nagini he hadn't yet met. Nagini carried a rare 4. People like her were called blood-cursed beastmen. Those cursed beings had abilities similar to an animagus, able to transform into a specific animal, but at a cost. Their humanity, reason, and emotion would be devoured by bestial instincts, and they'd be lost to their animal form forever. Lucien rubbed his temples. They still throbbed. None of this could be rushed. Gathering rare materials, curing curses, he would have to take it one step at a time. 275. Unexpected judges. Lucien circulated the faint, recovering magical energy within his body, and a little color returned to his pale face. Feeling steadier, he pushed open the heavy doors of the hall with Fleur at his side. The room was full. Contestants, students from various schools, specially invited judges, and many upperclassmen who had come to watch the competition clustered in small groups, chatting. The formal judging had not yet begun. Several long tables were laid out with delicate snacks and a variety of teas, giving the place a leisurely, social atmosphere, more like a tea party than a contest. Lucien's gaze swept the crowd and immediately found Madame Maxime, tall and imposing. Beside her stood several elderly men with gray hair and an unmistakable presence. From the respectful, curious way others treated them, they were clearly the master alchemists invited to serve as judges. Matching faces to photographs he'd seen in journals like Alchemy Progress and Matter Transformation, Lucien recognized them all as leading figures in the field. As he scanned the room, an older man who had been speaking with Madame Maxime turned around. When Lucien saw his face clearly, his pupils tightened. The man noticed Lucien looking, and their eyes met. A kind smile spread across his face. After a brief word to Madame Maxime and another master, he walked straight toward Lucien. His steps were steady, and his appearance that of a kindly old gentleman. He smiled at Fleur and said in a gentle voice, "Young lady, would you mind if I borrowed this handsome young man for a moment to have a few words?" Fleur, who didn't recognize him, nodded politely, out of good breeding. "Of course, please go ahead." They moved to a quieter corner of the hall where few people stood. Lucien could no longer hide his surprise and asked in a low voice, "Teacher, why are you here?" The ordinary-looking old man was Nicholas Flamel, or rather, a younger-looking Nicholas Flamel. The elixir of life he had created with the Philosopher's Stone had prolonged his existence, but not frozen the process of aging completely. Compared to the weathered 600-year-old visage Lucien might have imagined, this Flamel appeared as if he were in his 80s or 90s, a much different, almost unrecognizable look. Flamel grinned like a boy who had just pulled off a prank. "I heard Albus mention it earlier and thought it would be interesting to see you take part in this kind of competition, so I came to have a look," he said with a shrug. "And like this, no one here recognizes me." Lucien found himself speechless for a moment. The last time Flamel had looked like this had been 5 centuries ago. Unless the old master revealed himself, few in the current magical world would connect the name to the man. As Lucien was still adjusting to the surprise, Flamel's gaze studied him more closely, and his brow tightened. He reached out, placed a hand on Lucien's wrist, and a gentle pulse of magical energy flowed into him. After a moment, the concern deepened. "How is your magical energy so drained? It's nearly depleted. This isn't the result of ordinary spellwork," Flamel said. Lucien hurried to explain. "It was a small accident during an experiment with a new enchantment. I'm all right now, teacher. It's recovering." Flamel released his hand but kept a serious expression. The tone he took was that of a cautious elder. "Even with a gifted capacity, your body and magical core are still developing. You shouldn't overexert yourself. Be careful." Warmth spread through Lucien at the worry in the old man's voice. "I'll remember, teacher." There was little else to be done. A wizard's energy recovers mainly through internal circulation and time. Lucien changed the subject and looked toward the judge's table in the center of the hall. "Teacher, are you here to judge as well?" "Yes," Flamel answered frankly, then lowered his voice into a conspiratorial smile. "But I'm using another name and identity. Maxime knows the details, so there's no problem." He shrugged as if recalling something. "I originally wanted to drag Albus along, but he's been very busy and couldn't get away. Sigh, young people nowadays, always busy and never know how to relax." Hearing his 600-plus-year-old teacher grumble about the century-old young man, Dumbledore, like that, made the corner of Lucien's mouth twitch. He was at once amused and speechless. The exchange felt natural. Flamel would not show him favoritism on the bench, and Lucien trusted his own alchemical work to stand on its merits without special treatment. A moment later, Madame Maxime clapped her hands, and her clear voice carried through the hall. "Contestants and judges, please take your places. The final judging is about to begin." Lucien let his gaze sweep across the judges and returned a polite smile. Thank you, judges. Before I demonstrate, I will need the cooperation of one judge. This demonstration will also require a little extra space. Space? At Lucien's words, a guest judge wearing a single crystal monocle blinked and echoed the question automatically. He looked up and swept his gaze across the hall. Beauxbaton's palace was already famed for its grandeur, and this ceremonial hall was enormous, big enough to hold thousands. And yet the boy standing before them had just asked for more space? Lucien met the curious look and nodded. Yes, this alchemical device is called instant speech. He picked up one of the hardbound books and showed it to the judges. Its core function is to enable instant long-distance communication between users. It can transmit written text, voice, and synchronized images. Several of the esteemed masters on the panel straightened minutely at that. As for effective range, within a single county, it can guarantee clear, synchronized transmission of image and sound. If extended to a whole country or even international communication, Lucien trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. To demonstrate the full capabilities and limits of instant speech, would any judge be willing to assist me by apparating to a suitably distant, designated location? We need a real distance to test it. Silence fell. After his introduction, Lucien put the book down and waited. The panel locked for a moment in a kind of stunned hush. The idea itself, combined with the unflappable confidence in the teenager's voice, needed time to sink in. It was Nicholas, using his alias Antoine Fail, who broke the quiet. He did not dive into rune matrices or the coupling mechanics. Instead, he asked the most practical question of all. Lucien, your instant speech, what does it cost to produce? Technically, could it be made widely available? That question snapped the other judges out of their theoretical reverie. No matter how brilliant an invention, if it remained an expensive miracle only for laboratories or the tiny elite, its value would be limited. All eyes, newly focused and expectant, turned to Lucien. He was ready. Calmly, he explained the core components, the difficulty of reproducing the runes, and the approximate man-hours required. The figures he gave were still high, but not astronomically so. More importantly, he spelled out where optimizations could be made and which steps could be simplified. I believe alchemy shouldn't be a secret kept in high towers or a pursuit of power alone. Lucien's voice carried clearly across the hall, a maturity beyond his years. It should be a key to improving the lives of all witches and wizards. So when I developed instant speech, I focused on simplifying the production process and lowering the cost of a basic model. Naturally, the basic version will have limits, lower image resolution, less stability at extreme distances. Finding a better balance between cost and performance is what I will continue to work on. A teenager, standing before seasoned masters, had not only produced a device that could change the way people communicated, but had also spoken in terms of popularization, cost, and improving everyday life. Several senior alchemists fell deeper into thought. It wasn't that they were unaware of these concerns. In fact, after decades or centuries spent in this field, they were painfully aware of both the difficulties and the importance. Many of their creations had long since become part of ordinary life for wizards and witches. Because of that, they saw more clearly than most how rapidly ordinary life was changing in the Muggle world. Muggle inventions for communication and travel had progressed at an accelerating pace. Telephones became instant, networks of information spread, and whole new technologies appeared in only a few years, quickly altering daily life. By comparison, the popularization of alchemy had been painfully slow. True, many talented young wizards craved mysterious, profound, and powerful magics, seeking personal might and glory. Far fewer were willing to steady themselves through the loneliness and tedium of improving a lighting charm, so it required less effort, or extending a fresh-keeping charm's duration, or making communication easier for everyone. Alchemy demanded patience, creativity, and a kind of humility that many found unappealing. To those elders who had devoted their lives to it, the grand spells were seductive, but they also believed, with conviction, that it was practical alchemy that would genuinely transform the magical world and bring happiness to ordinary witches and wizards. 278. Instantaneous. After Lucien finished his introduction, The judges and 12s all showed keen interest. "I'll give it a try." Laurent Rosier was the first to speak, his tone carrying a hint of eagerness. "I'm fairly good at apparition." If his escape skills hadn't been impressive back then, it would have been difficult for him to completely avoid the turmoil during Grindelwald's rise, especially since his kinswoman Vinda Rosier had given him extra care. Before his voice had faded, Laurent had already stood briskly from behind the judge's table, giving his colleagues, who also intended to try, no time to react. He walked a few steps to Lucien and took the copy of Instant Speech from his hand. It felt warm and was very light. He turned to Madame Maxime in the main seat. "Principal, could you please temporarily open the school's transport permissions?" Like Hogwarts, Beauxbatons had protective enchantments against spatial lompum 79, such as apparition. Before Laurent had even finished, an exceptionally long wand had appeared in Madame Maxime's hand. Hearing the request, she gave an elegant wave without hesitation. An invisible ripple spread through the air, surged, and then settled in an instant. Temporary permissions were now active. Seeing Laurent move so quickly and perform the sequence so smoothly, the other judges and 12s who had planned to try instant speech said nothing more. In such a formal setting, they had to keep their dignity. Scrambling for the chance would have been unseemly. Besides, apparition back and forth was exhausting. It wasn't that they were slow or couldn't have beaten him to it. Laurent nodded, holding the book in one hand while his other hand reached into his robes for his wand. "Professor Laurent," Lucien suddenly said, "there's no need to trouble yourself." Before anyone could react, a strange creature appeared beside Laurent. It looked like a cross between a horse and a deer, its entire body covered in fine, pale gold scales, surrounded by bright yellow mist, its eyes clear as glass. And Lu Guang's appearance was complete almost the instant it vanished. Just by getting slightly close to Laurent, the figures of the man and the beast disappeared from the spot without any warning. There was no spinning, none of the uncomfortable noise or squeezing sensation typical of apparition. Such elegant, quiet, instantaneous spatial movement secretly alarmed the well-traveled 16Cs present. Lucien's expression remained calm as he reached out to open the copy of Instant Speech on the judge's table and lightly tapped a blank page with his finger. The pages flipped on their own and finally stopped on a completely blank sheet. The hall fell silent. The judges and 12s unconsciously leaned forward, eyes fixed on that blank space. The few seconds of waiting stretched out. Suddenly, the smooth surface of the paper glowed with a faint blue light like seawater, the light undulating softly. Then, "Can you see clearly here?" Lu Guang, this angle is adjusted correctly, right?" Professor Laurent's voice, slightly experimental but crystal clear, came directly from the book's pages. The changes did not stop there. Light and shadow began to converge and condense on the blue glowing page, quickly forming a clear, moving image. It was the Eiffel Tower. The screen smoothly shifted to a close-up of Professor Laurent's face. He seemed high above the city, the wind tangling his silver-gray hair, but his pale blue eyes were full of pure, childlike joy and excitement, his eyebrows nearly flying up. The image switched again to capture both Laurent's grin and the giant steel tower behind him. "I see you too, very clearly." His voice came through the pages, laced with obvious excitement. "Wait, I'm going to a new place." The image and sound cut off simultaneously, and the page returned to its blank, quiet state. Everyone watched in suspense. This time, the wait was slightly longer. A few seconds later, as if an invisible pen were writing on the paper, a line of slightly scrawled handwriting appeared. "Wait a moment. The photo will arrive in a bit." The handwriting betrayed the writer's urgent, excited mood. Several gray-haired masters at the judge's table leaned forward to their limits, breathing a little faster, eyes locked on the page so as not to miss a detail. Ding! A crisp, pleasant notification sounded from the Instant Speech. A flash of light appeared on the page, and a complete, clear static image was presented. In the center of the frame, Laurent wore a brilliant, almost exaggerated smile and gave a thumbs up to the camera. Behind him, under a bright foreign sun, the ancient and magnificent pyramids stood silent, testifying to the passage of ages. For a moment, everyone was speechless. At that moment, the function and potential of instant speech were beyond any doubt. Laurent was escorted back to the judge's table by Liu Guang, still clutching the copy of Instant Speech as if it were a talisman. He settled into the judge's seat and, for a moment, didn't seem to notice the demonstration had ended. His fingertips lingered on the edges of the pages and the embossed design on the cover. His pale blue eyes shone with a childish hunger for more. "Hey, Laurent!" The alchemist beside him, a man named Lance who wore a single crystal monocle, gave him a teasing nudge with his elbow. "Let me see that treasure. You've been holding it forever, and you even got a free trip out of it." Before Lance finished the sentence, one hand was already reaching for the book. Laurent pulled Instant Speech closer to his chest and leaned away, muttering under his breath. "Lance, at your age, rushing like that in front of everyone is unbecoming." Lance's monocle rattled a little with indignation. If the occasion had allowed it, a petty hex might have been cast. Seeing the situation, Lucien quickly slipped a hand into his robe pocket. Several brand new copies of Instant Speech rose by invisible hands and fluttered toward the judge's table, landing precisely in front of the judges and the sixes, every one except Laurent's. Then, Lucien took up the copy he had used for the demonstration and showed the back cover to everyone. "Everyone, allow me to briefly demonstrate how to use Instant Speech to add a contact, or, to use the Muggle term, add a friend." At the novel phrase, Maxime and the others picked up the thin books placed before them and turned to the back. In the lower left corner of the rear cover was a special code, a string of characters that glowed faintly with a magical signature. "This code is a magical cipher I designed," Lucien explained as he traced a light figure in the air with his wand. Golden light flowed from the tip and condensed into dozens of clear, floating sample characters in an instant. Every copy of Instant Speech bears a unique code that represents its identity. "Next, open to the first page," he continued. "Use the tip of your wand to write the information you wish to record on the page, a name or whatever you want." He paused to add, "You don't have to use your real name. Whether to use true personal details is entirely up to you." Caution was instinctive for any seasoned wizard. The wizarding world had never been short of curses tied to true names or identifying information. The infamous hexes surrounding the defense professor post at Hogwarts were only the most famous example. The judge's pens, wand tips, tapped and slid across the blank front pages with practiced ease. "Finally," Lucien said, drawing their attention back, "by entering the unique code from the back of that other copy, you send an application to that specific book." He gestured, and the demonstration characters shimmered. Once the application is accepted, the connection is established. After that, so long as your 13 permits it, you can communicate with your friend at any time, just as in the demonstration. The steps were simpler than most had imagined. Almost immediately, the judge's table was filled with the soft rustle of wand tips on paper, punctuated by occasional murmured exclamations and low chuckles as applications were sent and replies received. The alchemist masters and the six, normally severe, venerable, and conservative, took on the air of children given new toys. They hunched over their copies, writing, doodling, testing greetings and trivial messages, trading glances of delighted surprise as they explored this new mode of communication. Discussion of scores and rankings evaporated. Instant Speech had already transcended being merely an exceptional student project. It looked, now, like an invention capable of reshaping how the wizarding world communicated, perhaps even ushering in a new era. In the presence of that possibility, talk of points felt trivial. Below, the contestants and the surrounding student audience fared worse. They could only watch, craning their necks and pressing forward on the benches, hearts itching like a cat's paw as they longed to try it. But with Principal Maxime and so many masters in front of them, no one dared to step forward. A new line of handwriting appeared on the Instant Speech in Madame Maxime's hand. Antoine fell. "How is my student?" Maxime glanced reflexively at the young man beside her, Nicolas, and caught the same soft, fond smile on his face that the little emoji conveyed. 280. "Do you have a master?" Madame Maxime sat in the center of the judge's panel and took in the relaxed, satisfied smile on Nicolas's face. Her own lips curved in understanding. She had, after all, personally confirmed every guest judge's invitation, so she knew the true identity of Antoine Fell. From Nicolas's expression, she could read the unmistakable pride he felt for Lucien, his protégé and successor. She lowered her head slightly and tapped her wand against her own copy of 15 to leave a reply. When I first met Lucien, I had a premonition that this child would change the magical world. I simply did not expect that future would already be the present. It happened too quickly. She looked up again, her gaze settling on Lucien, standing alone in the center of the presentation platform. Warm sunlight poured through the windows, bathing him. His dark gold hair shimmered in the light. Facing a scene that felt destined for the history books, the young man stood tall, his dark green eyes composed and calm. Maxime's appreciation deepened. She cleared her throat and with her sonorous, elegant voice that silenced the murmurs, addressed him. Lucien Grafton, yours is undoubtedly a masterpiece. And I believe many here, am curious. How did you conceive such a brilliant idea? What was your inspiration? At once, the professors and judges, who had been idly handling copies of Bon, looked up. The contestants and student audience, who had been waiting expectantly, inhaled as one. All eyes focused on Lucien. He met them, inclined his head slightly, and replied in his usual unhurried tone. Thank you for your praise, Madame Maxime. The idea didn't come from nowhere. Like many inventions, I stood on the shoulders of giants, drawing on and integrating the wisdom of those who came before me. The shoulders of giants? The entire hall, judges, professors, students, leaned forward mentally. Was he referring to an unpublished alchemical manuscript, some cutting-edge thesis in a 21 journal? Under the crowd's expectant gaze, Lucien answered calmly. Instant speech draws heavily from the internet system of the Muggle world. At the word internet, many wizards registered bewilderment. A few students' faces soured at the mention of Muggle. The magical world's old attitudes, scorning Muggle things, celebrating pure wizard blood, made the idea that a creation praised by alchemists and capable of changing an age might be inspired by supposedly inferior Muggle devices difficult to accept. But when those students glanced toward the judges' panel for confirmation of their disdain, they were disappointed. The alchemy masters showed no contempt. After an initial flicker of surprise, admiration, and excitement flared in their eyes. They looked as if they had found a rare treasure, a pure appreciation for vision and ingenuity that rose above prejudice. Lucien didn't mind the stir below. He explained clearly, translating Muggle concepts into metaphors wizards could grasp. In the Muggle internet, information, text, images, sound is divided into countless leven. Each packet is stamped with a destination address, then sent out like a flock of the swiftest, most knowledgeable owls, each choosing different paths to reach the destination. When all the packets arrive, they are reassembled precisely into the complete information. He paused, letting the image sink in as he scanned the judges' intent faces. Of course, 15 uses magical methods to replicate and improve on that. For instance, alchemy and runes are used to cut and mark information. Existing basic 21 from the wizarding world, connection charms, revealing charms, voice transmission charms, are used to construct stable paths and reassembly mechanisms. These specific implementations rely on the wealth of knowledge left to us by countless predecessor wizards. Below, the students' expressions shifted from curiosity to confusion. Half of them barely understood the Muggle concepts to begin with, and mixed together with alchemical principles and rune theory, their heads felt stuffed with buzzing venomous tentacula, unable to follow the logic. On the judges' panel, it was quite different. The masters listened raptly, nodding when something clicked, or falling thoughtfully silent as they examined the implications. So young, and yet possessing such talent and solid grounding, rarer still was the ability to cross conceptual boundaries, drawing nourishment from a foreign world, borrowing, integrating, and transcending it. That breadth of vision moved them more than mere technical skill. As Lucien finished, Lance, the alchemist with the single crystal monocle, couldn't restrain himself. He leaned forward and, before anyone else could, asked the question that had been circling in the master's minds for some time, his voice edged with urgency. "Grafton," he said abruptly, "do you have a teacher in alchemy? Someone who passed down their legacy, who truly guided you, a master?"